Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us at Manchester Poetry Library. We're here to talk about the wonder that is verse novels, and it's a real honour to host this evening in our new public poetry library. And we're also live streaming, so welcome to anybody else who's not with us, who might be watching anywhere in the world. We've had quite a lot of international visitors to our digital programme. So I'm Becky Swain, the Director of Manchester Poetry Library here at Manchester Metropolitan University. The toilets, if you need them while you're here, are just outside to the right. If we did have a fire procedure just out the main entrance where the portico entrance is, and we just congregate outside. If you've got mobile phones, please do turn them to silent. And I think you all know that we're photographing the event tonight. So we opened in September with a starting collection of contemporary poetry. We've got 10,000 books and recordings, but we are a listening library. We are absolutely never going to be finished. So if there's anything that comes into your mind tonight that you think we should have here, whether it's verse novel or poetry, poetry collections, anthology, single author, just let us know. Like any public library, we're open to anyone to become a member. I'll say that again, anyone. So if you know anybody interested in poetry, whether they're in Manchester or further afield, they can go to the website and join. So tonight we're collaborating with Youth Libraries Group, YLG for short, which I'll say quite often. It's a wonderful collaboration. It's the first time that YLG as a whole have been in the Poetry Library, except that before we opened, I think sneakily you had a meeting in here before anybody else had come. So it feels like you're the inaugural group that came. I think you were discussing the Kate Greenaway and Carnegie Prize winners. So Jake Hope, who's the YLG National Chair, helped us launch our children's collection back in November 2020, and he hosted an event with Mandy Coe and her book Belonging Street. So YLG have been friends of Manchester Children's Book Festival for years, and they're now, thankfully, friends of the Poetry Library. We're delighted to welcome Amanda Childs shortly, librarian at Lostock High and the Northwest YLG chair this evening. Amanda will be in conversation with verse novelists C.G. Moore and Louisa Reid, and we hope that this will be first of many conversations about how we develop our verse novel collection here at Manchester Poetry Library. There is a book request form on our website, so if you think of anything, just go on and let us know. And before we welcome Amanda, Chris and Louisa, I'm delighted to welcome a very, very special guest, writer Anne Fine. I won't say much because I know Jake will introduce you, Anne, but we're delighted to welcome you to the library and to show you our beginning, fledgling poetry collection. And when Mandy Coe co-curated the children's collection, Jake put Mandy in touch with Anne and her own poetry anthology that we'll hear a bit about. So I'll hand over to Jake, and please enjoy the evening. And if you need anything, we're just staff at the back, just ask. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Becky. It is a real pleasure to be here this evening in the Poetry Library, and what a fantastic asset for Manchester to have a poetry library. I think Manchester has some incredible libraries, and to be able to include a poetry library amongst their number is, yeah, it feels like that elevates the whole cultural offer in the city. I am absolutely delighted to be able to introduce Anne Fine this evening. Anne, as many of you will know, is twice winner of the Carnegie Medal. She won with Goggle Eyes, and she won again with Flower Babies. Alongside that, Anne was the first novelist in the UK to be honoured as the Children's Laureate. And during her laureateship, one of her initiatives was around encouraging children to think about poems that they might otherwise miss. And so she curated 3 anthologies called Ashamed to Miss. And Anne is going to talk to us a little bit about those anthologies, about the process that was involved in that. And she will also be introducing us to her new novel. Her new novel is called Aftershocks. It's a fantastic sort of young adult novel. It's all about sort of grief, but alongside being about grief, it's also incredibly life-affirming. Indeed, it's been reviewed as being the most life-affirming novel about grief that has been written and read. So that's really rather lovely. Named as the Times Children's Book of the Week, which is fantastic. So without further ado, can I please introduce Anne Fine?
Most of the time, somebody who's a novelist who said to a publisher, I would like to put together a group of poems, they would say, well, actually, that's not what you're known for, Anne, and that would have been the end of the matter. But when you become the laureate, you have a tiny bit of clout, and that's more or less why I took the role, because I thought this is my big chance to do two things I've always thought ought to be done. And one, of course, was the downloadable book plates, the free downloadable book plates. But the poetry one was, in a way, even more close to my heart. We did an awful lot of poetry when I was at school. And I had a rather fiendishly scary teacher called Mrs. Niven, who made me learn one a week for the whole of the time that my father was determinedly getting rid of my Northampton accent. So it was speech classes or something. But I absolutely loved learning the poems. And when I started going into schools, when I was an author myself, what worried me is the paucity of quality of the language that the children were coming across. And there were reasons for this. I mean, one of the reasons for this is that at the time we had a huge number of children in our schools for which English was not the original language. So to have presented them with certain sorts of poems would have just made their lives even more difficult, as they were sometimes stepping off the plane from Somalia or something with not a word of English and going straight into schools. And secondly, there was no streaming or setting, so even the children who were, ready for good poems. And also assemblies had stopped because we had such a plethora of religions. You were no longer doing what we had to do every morning, which was singing hymns like, immortal, invisible, God only wise, in light inaccessible, hid from our eyes. I mean, the language is remarkable. And but they're not singing that sort of stuff anymore. And I began to think, as Jake said, that it's just a shame that they're missing so much, the ones that would like them. And then I came across this particular poem which absolutely focused my mind. It was about daffodils, and the chapter, the poem is called I Hate Poems, and it's about this child who sits there and she hates it when the poets come because they're shouting at her and they're talking at her, and it's all, too aggressive, and she can't stand it. And she sits and closes her ears and thinks about daffodils dancing in the wind. It's in one of the collections, either 1, 2, or 3. So I put together these 3 collections of poems that I really did think it would be a great shame to miss, and I still think so. And I still think that, I've got lots of copies of them at home, which I give to grandchildren when they reach certain ages. The third one is as much for adults as for older children. And it's actually one of the things that I'm most pleased about. I might say that they don't reprint because it is astonishing how complicated it is to put together a poetry collection, because certain people will only license you for, so many thousand reprints or so many hundred reprints, and other people don't mind, and other people are dead and out of copyright anyway. And so at a certain point, you can't reprint anymore without paying half of them again, which is a bit too much when you're no longer laureate. So that is the end of that. But as you know, mostly I'm a novelist, and Aftershocks is a very sort of, it's an odd book. All through my professional life, people have come up to me and said, I wish you'd write a book about this, or I wish you'd write a book about that. And you can understand why, because we absolutely know that children feel their way through life. They learn a huge amount from the books they read. Even if it doesn't reflect their own experience, it often enlightens them about the world or other people's near to them's experiences. It often shows them a way to go, a line to take. Sometimes it's as simple as we read to know that we are not alone, the famous saying, and sometimes it's that identification thing. You think, well, he's a bit of a wimp, and he's got through, so if he can manage it, then I can manage it as well. And so it's that feeling that, you know, you're not completely defeated by problems. But I never thought that I would write about grief. And the reason is, I mean, look at me, I bite my nails till they bleed. I'm a nervous person. The mere thought of something as awful as, you know, losing a child in a bike accident, just like that, I couldn't even want to think about it. And because I'm kind of known for this ruthless honesty in my work, I would have thought it would be far too much for any child. But then there's always a shift. You get this shift in your brain where the gears change and you think, oh, I can do this. And what set me off was a long article in the, well, they're all long, aren't they, in the London Review of Books, but it was a long article about the tsunami in Japan in 2011 when this absolutely disastrous tsunami destroyed so many lives and so much property. And then strange things began to happen. You know, there were sightings of people who were dripping wet. People saw people looking wet. Somebody would sit on a cushion and everybody in the sewing group knew that she was dead, but she'd come in and she'd sat on the cushion and then she got up and left again, but the cushion was soaking wet. Now, we don't tend to believe in ghosts in this way in the Western culture, but it did set me thinking about death, about how everybody has a past and a present and a future. And if you have a sudden accident and you're dead, you just have the past. You no longer have the present. You no longer have the future. But for everybody who knew you, to whom you were very dear, it can't just cut off like that. So, you know, people hear echoes of the voice. They see the person in dreams. They see them disappearing round a corner in a crowd. It takes time for everything to settle after a death. And the distance of the tsunami was an interesting one because the book is essentially a rather adventurous story of daring do. And poor old Louis has lost his elder brother in this horrible accident. His parents are both grieving in completely different ways. Mum wants to keep Toby, her precious firstborn, alive in conversations and, oh, he loved this and he would have that. And Dad can't bear to hear his name. He's grieving so badly. So the two of them are splitting apart. It's very difficult for them both. And there's Louis. And children, as we know, can't bear watching their parents in pain. They actually can't bear it. So he's closing down as well. But then here he is with his dad, who is, you know, in this strange part of a strange country, which is like ours, but not like ours. And Dad has to stay after the tsunami happens because he's an engineer. And, you know, after tsunami, what do you need? You need engineers, you need fresh water. And so he comes, the boy comes to see how this community is dealing with it. And of course it raises his own ghosts of what's happening in his own family. And all I can say is it's not a gloomy book, but the echoes of the cultural thing of the hundreds of people who have been bereaved by the tsunami echo, in a way, his own personal thing. But he learns a huge amount and he gradually comes to terms. So it's a strange novel. It's partly a coming-age novel. It's partly a ghost story. There's a lot of the usual stuff that I have about how people's emotions and moods refract in a family, which has always been what has interested me most as a novelist, how one person's character or moods, or even just passing bad mood, can reflect on absolutely everybody in a family and illuminate things or close them down. I mean, if you like ghost stories, it's got quite a lot of. I mean, I've never done a successful ghost story, and it isn't a ghost story per se, but it is creepy in places. And I think after these, I mean, to finish, after these grim 2 years in which even if we ourselves have not been touched, particularly apart from inconvenience by the COVID epidemic, we know that all our children have every day for the last 2 years listened to death counts. They have heard apocalyptic predictions from scientists about how many people will be dead next week. They have constantly seen and heard of people grieving people that were very precious to them. So grief and death are in the atmosphere. They have been for 2 years. And I actually think that although this book was begun before COVID, it couldn't, I think, be more timely. If I had any children to give books to, which tragically I no longer do because they're all middle-aged, I would be giving them this one. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Hang on. And now another one to add to the TBR list, to be read book pile that is ever increasing as a librarian. Good evening, my name's Amanda Child. As said earlier, I'm the school librarian at Lostock High School in Trafford, and it is my absolute pleasure and honour to be the chair of the Youth Library Group North West. And I've been introduced to poetry more and more with the Poetry Library being in Manchester, the best city in the world after Salford, and the fact that it is down the road from where I live, and I'm going to become a constant visitor. But we have got two amazing authors with us this evening. We have CJ Moore and we have Louisa Reid, and they're going to tell us a little bit about themselves and their book. So I'm going to start with Louisa, ladies first. I'm old-fashioned, what can I say? Can you tell us about who you are and introduce us to Rect?
Certainly, I'd be happy to do so. Thank you so much for inviting me along. And it's great to be here, and also to meet Anne Fine, who for many years has been someone who I've hugely looked up to. So what a brilliant thing to hear about her new book. And I've taught some of her novels in school as well, because I am an English teacher as well as a writer. So it's really brilliant to have had that pleasure and to meet you too. So great to be here. So I'm a writer of actually quite a long time now. My first novel came out in 2012, so it's nearly 10 years since I was first published. And Wrecked is my fourth book, but my second verse novel. So my first two novels were both prose novels, and then when I wrote Gloves Off, that was my first novel in verse, and then I caught the bug. So Wrecked is about Joe Goodenough, and his name is deliberately, resonant. This idea of a young man growing up and encountering all kinds of challenges and problems, familial, but also in his social relationships with his girlfriend Imogen in particular. And I'm often setting out to write a love story, and my love stories always go wrong. And there's rarely much of a soppy moment to be had, really. And Joe finds that with Imogen, romance is certainly not a straightforward thing. So the novels will set around a court case. He's been put on trial for causing death by dangerous driving. At this point, he is 18, and he has got to face up to a terrible crime as an adult and be tried in an adult court. So the novel is an awful lot about issues to do with truth, really. Who's telling the truth? Who gets away with telling lies about about things. That, I think, it couldn't really be more important at the moment, couldn't it? Everybody seems to have their own version of events and versions of truth, and some people who are powerful people think, actually, well, my version of this is the version you need to believe. So this story, in a sense, it engages with that, because Joe and Imogen are from two very different socioeconomic backgrounds, and there's kind of questions over, I don't want to give anything away, but how much you can buy your way out of trouble. It's about taking risks as a teenager. It's about getting yourself into situations that you really should have avoided, and it's about the consequences of those misjudgments, those rash, impulsive decisions you might make when you're young, especially amongst your peer group. And it's about confronting the realities and responsibilities and consequences of that. So I loved writing this, and it's set, as I said, around this court case, and it goes back into Joe's life and follows him from about year 9 onwards, when he first meets Imogen, and they get more and more kind of embroiled in this rather toxic relationship. So there's also quite a lot in here about red flags in relationships, and when might be a good time to, pull away and pull back. So yeah, I love Joe and the story, and that's it really, I think.
I too love Joe.
Oh, thank you.
And the things I wanted to say to Imogen, that
Oh,
young
yes,
lady.
yes, yeah.
We won't go there.
She needs a talking to. Well.
Absolutely. And Chris, lovely to meet you. I briefly saw you on Piccadilly train station once, but we won't go into that just now, not just now. If you could introduce yourselves and tell us about gut feelings.
So I'm C.G. Moore. You can call me Chris, because C.G. Moore feels a bit weird if you're talking to me in person. So this is my book, Gut Feelings. So this is my second book. My first book and both of my books were published in the pandemic. So this is kind of my first in-person event, which is a bit surreal. I can almost reach out and touch people. So my first book was in prose. Fallout, and it was basically about a family dynamic and what happens when a teenager kind of comes out to his parents, and in all aspects of his life things aren't going well. They start to slowly slip out of his grip, and he starts to try to gain control, and sometimes when we try to gain control in our lives, things slip further away. This one is an interesting one because I was reading kind of Sarah Crossan's work, Kwame Alexander, so a lot of different verse novels, and I've been trying to write. When I set out to write, I always wanted to write fiction. I never wanted to write about myself. Never wanted to do it. So this book is actually basically autobiographical in a way. When I was 11 years old, I was taken into a hospital. I had a blood test, and my mum and dad were crying. And I had absolutely no idea why my mum and dad were crying. We were in the car on the way home, and my dad handed me 100 Irish pounds at the time, and I was devastated because I could feel this emotion suffocating me, but I didn't know what it was. And for a long time with my illness, I had no idea what it was. I was diagnosed with familial adenomatous polyposis, which we call FAP for short, because if you keep using that name a lot, you run out of time. But when you're speaking. But so basically what happens is, it's like if you ever had a wart on your hand and you can imagine that on the inside of your large intestine and it's starting to turn cancerous, that's basically what my illness is. So when I was 13, I was taken into hospital and I had my large intestine completely removed. And I was told that basically if I didn't have this surgery, I wouldn't live to see 21. I'd be dead. They expected to see maybe 10, 20, 30 polyps. They saw hundreds, if not thousands. So that's where Gut Feelings came in. I really wanted to write this story, and I really wanted to capture the emotion of what happened to me, because then when I was 17, I had to have further surgeries, I have to have checkups, and then obviously having those surgeries has a profound impact on all aspects of your life, especially as a gay man. It has numerous impacts on my life, love life, sex life, in, even in workshops or events or that kind of thing at home. And I wanted to try and tell people about that and about what it's like to have an invisible illness and my experience, and be really authentic. But I really wanted to get the emotion and what I was actually feeling in those moments in. And the only way to do that was in verse. It was the only way I could actually write it, to be honest.
Right.
Sorry, that was quite doom and gloom.
No, but having read it, I was trying to think. You forget all the things that are embarrassing to teenagers, and having to go through just being a regular teenager, dealing with different things, but having to deal with such an illness that most people wouldn't even consider, you go, gosh, I'm amazed he's still going, quite frankly. So I'm glad you're here,
Thank you. Thank you so much.
after going through all that, and
I'm glad too.
and I think everyone should read that sort of thing to like have the empathy and just understand the trauma that people go through. I did like your in all disabilities that aren't visible, because you do get the person on the bus, I'm sure, that wants to tell you to stand up, young man,
And
and
give
you're
your
like,
seat up.
no, you can't, because I can't. So yes, yeah, power to you.
Thank you.
Very much. Yeah. Now, same questions now are going to come at both of you. So, why did you choose to write in verse?
Shall I go first?
It's
Shall
up
I?
to you.
Yeah. So gloves off. I started writing it in prose, and I just got frustrated with the form. It wasn't reading it back. I didn't feel the emotional connection to the story that I really wanted to, and so I thought, well, like you, I'd read Sarah Cross and lots of other verse novels. I thought, shall I have a go at that? I could have a go at that. I don't know. Maybe I can do that. So I just did, and then I that's how I got hooked with it, really. And it was, as you were saying, it's about making that kind of emotional impact with the writing, isn't it? And coming really, really close to the feelings of the character and being able to put those kind of first and foremost, so the connection with the reader to that emotion and gather that kind of empathy for the main character is there. So, but verse is so sort of creative, isn't it? You can come at it from so many different angles. I feel like it's almost limitless what you can do with a free verse novel at the moment. Nobody's written out a rule book for a verse novel. You must do this. There we can basically break as many rules as we like. So in Gloves Off, for example, I got rid of some punctuation, and probably some people wouldn't really enjoy that. But there were no capital letters in Lily's bits. But that was supposed to show that she felt small and belittled. And I know it's a kind of obvious thing, but for me that was very much part and parcel of her character. And verse novels are often polyphonic, so you can have more than one voice, which you can in a normal novel as well. Normal novel, but you know what I mean, traditional prose novel. But I loved having Lily's mum, Bernadette, and the contrast of the voices, and Bernadette's kind of maturity and different outlook, but also her massive vulnerabilities as well, coming into conflict with her daughters, which for me I felt was a very, very powerful way to contrast those two people in the family and see how that dynamic worked itself out. So there's so many reasons why I love writing verse now. I get a thrill from it as a writer, because when I'm in that zone, when you're in the flow, when you're writing verse, the kind of speed and the pace and the intensity of it is really immersive, and hopefully that's the same kind of experience that a reader's having. So as a writer, I absolutely enjoy it, and I enjoy reading it aloud. I enjoy almost kind of performing bits of it. I think it works really well for that too. So I'm a complete convert to verse now as a writer. I think I can't imagine going back. We'll see.
Yeah. Well,
You never know.
You have the
You
option.
never know.
You can
Yeah.
do what you want, quite frankly,
Yes,
Louisa.
you can.
do what you want.
Yeah,
That's
I will.
it.
Yeah.
And you were mentioning when you were talking about that you
Yeah.
felt that it should be a verse novel.
It's kind of weird. So I will echo kind of what you said, and I think as an English teacher you'll agree that once you kind of know the rules, you can break the rules in a
Yeah.
sense. Like once you know the rules of poetry, you can actually break the rules with free verse. And you'll find when you read different novelists, some novelists have a very particular style and tone to the way they write things. I think of Kwame Alexander, and I think of Booked and Rebound and The Crossover, and they're all very distinct, but you know it's a Kwame Alexander novel when you read it. I mean, I don't know if I should share this or not, but it was 2017. I'd left the job. I worked in a sort of corporate company, and there was a lot of things happening. Every week we kept hearing, oh, by the way, this department's getting laid off, and this is happening, and this is happening. I was living in London. I had anxiety, and I don't think I was ever really diagnosed. Even just being on the tube and being pressed up against the window was really intense. And I remember ringing the doctor at one point and saying, like, they said, oh, we've got an appointment in 3 weeks. And I just said, I don't think I'm going to last till the end of the day if I don't speak to somebody. Like, I'm really, like, on the edge. And I remember going into a room with my manager and crying. And eventually, like, I ended up giving him a notice, which unfortunately was 3 months, which was ludicrous to me as well, that I had that in my contract. So I'm working every day. And finally, like, I kind of leave this job and my friend takes me to Ambleside, which I knew nothing about the Lake District, and we go in and there's just this tranquility to Ambleside if anyone's ever been, and there's no phone coverage, and I'm just there. And when I didn't have time to even think about what I wanted to write or how I would write it or anything in this job, because I literally just locked myself in my bedroom, turned off the light, and I wouldn't even eat. I didn't even want to go downstairs and see anybody. I just did not want to encounter anybody else. That's how low and sort of, I can't even describe it, because what went on in my head is just like, I can't even get those words out there without reading the no, I'm joking. But yeah, it was really intense. But when I was there, everything, and I wanted to write this story for a long time. I wanted to write fiction, and I wanted to write it, and the more I talked about my story and the more people that realized, especially talking to other particularly gay males that I encountered that kind of had similar things or had ostomy bags and things like that, I kind of realized it's actually quite important, and no one else has done this, and no one else is doing this, and being vocal about it. So I kind of wanted to do it again. I didn't know how to do it, and I never actually tried to write it in prose or any other form. And I'd read a lot of Sarah Crossan at the time, and particularly I think The Weight of Water, and one really kind of like, The Weight of Water I think is a phenomenal novel, and it just, how you can get so much emotion into so few words captivated me. And with my illness, it's like when I try and tell people about my illness, I've got to say, oh, this is what my illness is, but you don't have any idea, like when I go to work, like my routine, how I have to deal with it, that I've got to take 3 different kinds of medication, that if I take my strongest medication it's codeine and I'm sleepy, and I can't capture all of that in a sentence. And that's all people want, really. Like we want to understand, but we also want a soundbite, because we can only hold our attention for so long. So with verse, I really had to think about, you know, how I can capture so much in so little, and it just seemed to work. But on an unconscious level, everything just clicked, and when it clicked and I sat down to write it, I think I wrote like 40-50 pages in a sitting. I think there's 400 pages in the book, so I'd written an eighth of the novel by sitting down and just writing it. It came so quick, because there was so much emotion in here, and it was really cathartic to write.
And that leads so beautifully, thank you very much, to my next question. It's like we rehearsed this already. So you do write emotional novels, both of you. I get angry, so I'm a bit too angry sometimes, and maybe I shouldn't read as much YA as I do, because I become more angry on behalf of every teenager I work with. But what was the first and the last book, Chris, that made you cry?
I don't cry, believe it or not. Like, not when I'm
You're
reading
not dead
it.
inside.
Yes, I am, but thanks for revealing that to everybody in the room and all these lovely people around the world that are watching this in our live stream. So I don't really cry, but I feel things intensely. And when I watch things on TV, I watch things like It's a Sin and Pose, particularly related to the LGBTQ experience. That's quite tough. I feel it, but I don't cry, but it just kind of haunts me. I can't really remember the first novel that made me cry, if I'm being honest. I always remember this, when I was younger, my earliest memory of books was this kind of A2 green glossy, I'm looking up there, like I can see it, envelope with all these kind of big books and big pictures, and like it was like just Christmas, but I read them all year round because I just loved them, and they just felt warm and familiar. In terms of the last book that really impacted me was Lemcy Says My Name Is Why. I'm making a conscious effort, well, I don't know, I just suddenly decided here, but I have made a conscious effort to really think about, because I'm trying to encourage people to read more books around invisible illness and disability, etc., mental health. It only seems right that I put myself into the shoes of other people and try to understand their experience. The books are out there, and we should all be reading them and widening the scope of what we read. And it's beautiful and brutal and just devastatingly honest, and I'm actually getting goosebumps now, like, might be the air conditioning, no, I'm joking. No, but I'm actually getting goosebumps. It's like, you just want to pick that young boy up and hold him and just say everything's going to be okay, and it's just, it really, like, it just gets you here. If you have not read it, I would highly recommend it.
Well, maybe you don't have to cry. Maybe just having that deep, intense emotion is exactly what people want you to do. They want you to have that strong emotion. So
yeah, no, definitely.
I apologise profusely for saying you're dead inside.
No, it's fine. We got it on camera now.
You're never going to speak to me again.
That's going on book 3, which will also be a verse novel. Chris is dead inside, a warm read. You could put that in as a little verse poem, maybe.
Thank you. Louisa? Have we cried? Have we been stirred internally?
Yeah. Was trying to remember the first. It's hard to go back, isn't it? But I definitely remember being very moved by Jude the Obscure by Thomas Hardy when I read that as a teenager. And there was the children, done because we was too many. They've left this little note and then they've taken their lives, and it was just like, oh, how could this be so brutally savage for this impoverished, desperate family and the children to do that. So that brought me to tears. And I think also there's a section in Great Expectations when Pip's talking about Estella and he's kind of carried away, and it's a really poetic section where he talks about how much he loves her and how she'll be in every line he ever reads. He's just the poor, rough, common boy whose heart she wounded. And it was just music to my ears as a teenager reading that kind of absolute love and devotion and feeling of loss and grief. So those were my earliest recollections of being very, very moved. But most recently, quite a few books actually have made me cry of late. But I've just been reading an early proof of Amy Beashall. I don't know if you read The Sky Is Mine by her, but it was brilliant YA. She got her next one coming out. It's called We Are Constellations, and it's about grief, and it's about a girl finding her story, finding who she is and what's happened to her mum, because her mum died and she's always been told that it was in a house fire, and she begins to discover some further information. And the way Amy writes is so powerfully emotional, making that kind of empathetic connection. So I was very moved to read the section there. But similar, I've just read a book called Notes on an Execution by Dania Kafka, and that's incredible. This is about a serial killer, and he is a serial killer. He's on death row, and it's actually more the stories of his victims. But the skill of that writer is that she was able to make me feel deeply for both the murderer and the women who had lost their lives. So I cried quite a bit at that as well. So like you, I just love going into other heads, other worlds, other people, other experiences. I don't want to just read about myself. I want to read about everybody else.
I want to read about myself.
Oh,
No,
do
I'm
you?
joking. I'm sorry, just to dislodge something that you were talking
Yeah.
about Great Expectations. To Kill a Mockingbird, I think that was probably my earliest.
Oh, okay.
I couldn't really understand. I was always younger in my class as well. I think I was like about a year and a half younger than like sort of the boys in my class, because I started school early and I skipped transition year as well, and I just couldn't understand that sort of racial inequality. It just didn't compute, and especially because I didn't really grow up around it, I was really like confused and really like, hurt by it, but also unable to process it in some ways.
Oh, it's Killing my
Very
favourite
powerful book.
Yeah.
It is. Yeah. I love To Kill a Mockingbird. Now, apart from your books, and feel free to pitch for those if you want them to be included, which verse novels do you think should be included in the Poetry Library's verse novel collection, and why? Because we are actually going to be able to, the Poetry Library have asked YLG members if that we have any suggestions to put in this new collection, and I believe somebody's going to be talking about that later. What would you think should be included in this wonderful new collection?
Shall I go first?
Yeah.
Well, I brought a little
Nicholas,
stash. I don't think we can not mention this book, which is just absolutely phenomenal. I might go and put a bet on down at betting shop for this winning the Carnegie this year, because I think it's just so brilliant. Manjeet Mann is she just writes in such an honest and authentic way about things that matter. This book is about diversity and connection. It's about the problems of our society, but it's also about kind of reaching out across boundaries and linking. And there's just the way in which she uses the economy of her verse, but the beauty of it. There's a little verse that says, Dad, because the mum's died, so again we've got grief at the very start, her grief for her mum, missing her. Mum was like winter socks. She knew how to keep you warm. She knew how to hold you. Dad's like fingerless gloves. He tries, but he doesn't quite reach your edges, the important bits, the bits that really matter. I just thought the writing's so beautiful, so clever, and so clear. That imagery is just something that young people can connect to and understand really, really easy. But and the structural device in this, with the way in which the two voices kind of overlap and echo one another. And again, it's got sport, as Run Rebel did, and Run Rebel's brilliant too. So sport is a really empowering thing for young people. So I'm definitely going for this one. I'm also going for Lucy Cutu's Blood Moon, which I think is such a fantastic verse novel, especially given the prevalence of online shaming for young women. But the way in which she approaches writing about sex for girls and their experience of their first sexual experiences, it's really empowering. And female sexual desire in this book is something to celebrate, not to be ashamed of until she's kind of forced to feel ashamed. So I think this is also absolutely a no-brainer for me. It's a feminist book with a very, very powerful message, and again, beautifully done. She's got a real knack for kind of internal rhyme and clever wordplay as well. Now, this isn't really a YA book, but I love this one, Charlotte, by David Fern-Kinos. This is about a real-life person, Charlotte Solomon, who was in the, I think it's born 1920s, 1930s, but anyway, she's a Jew, and she is under threat, obviously, in Germany at this time. But she is a woman of huge artistic talent, and that's recognised, but she's not allowed to win the prizes because she's Jewish. And then she has to kind of escape from the Nazis and so on, and it follows that. And again, the writing is just spectacular, and I think young people would hugely engage with this on so many levels. The idea of the suppression of women artists, the suppression of different ethnicities and race, the trouble, but there's also a lot in here about mental health as well, and kind of hereditary mental health passed on through the ages, this fears of succumbing to mental illness. So that's brilliant. Or I could go on, I've got loads more. I'm going to give a little plug to my adult novel and verse coming out in June. And this I'm really proud of. It's called The Poet, and it's about a woman who wants to be a poet, but it's also about Charlotte Mew, a great poet of the early 20th century. So the two women are both the poets of the title. And I think that Charlotte Mew, as a historical poetic figure, needs to be brought back into the canon and celebrated much, much more. When I'm teaching and I'm doing a Charlotte Mew poem, I know that this will get the kids excited, because she tells stories in her poems as much as she is experimental and original. There's story there, and whenever I'm teaching a poem with a story, then it flies. So I think I'd like to see my next one coming in, and definitely sixth formers are going to enjoy that, I would say. Did I miss anything out? Oh, Bernardine Evaristo, her first novel, I think it's called Lara, it's semi-autobiographical. That is stunning piece of writing, absolutely brilliant. I'd get that in there too. I could keep listing, but I'll let you have a go.
I'm really pleased that this is being recorded, because then Kay can get them all down on paper later. She will, I'm sure, add them to her list.
I've with The Crossing, I haven't read it yet. It's on my list.
You're in for a treat.
I can't wait. I'm
Now
really
you might
excited.
have to get the tissue out.
Yeah. Oh my
remember, I'm
goodness.
dead inside.
No,
Don't cry.
your emotional heart will be pulled.
You won't be able to resist crying at this, I'm telling you.
Okay.
Heartbreak and tragedy.
I'll record myself as I read it. And just
Yeah.
So I think one of the strongest verse novels, I think I would dare say of all time, is The Black Flamingo by Dean Atta. I don't like. Again, it's very sad. It's brutal. It's honest. It looks at intersectionality. It looks at identity and not belonging in one community or another community in terms of race, and also in terms of being gay and that sort of identity as well, and then embracing, the way that he kind of ties it all together with this idea of the black flamingo and who that kind of performer is. I think Dean as well is somebody who writes dare I say, with a scalpel. Like, he really cuts deep with his words, and he knows how to use his words to maximum impact. And he writes it so much. There's just so much of him in his writing. I think it goes without saying that the Poet X, Elizabeth's book, The Poet X, should be there again, looking at identity. And I find it really hard to talk about, because identity is something that I kind of write about as well, and that, sorry, I got a little bit choked up. I just, yeah, it's when you kind of feel the journey that the characters, I mean, it's been a while since I read it, but when you feel the idea of identity and not being able to be yourself around your family, or having different sort of aspects of who you are and having to hide, that kind of echoes back to, as a gay person, having to kind of hide aspects of who you are with certain people and be careful of who you are. So kind of those two books I do really relate to, maybe perhaps in different ways to other people. I think Kwame Alexander's books are absolutely phenomenal as well, particularly for boys. I think when they look at the idea of sport and they look at that and interweave that with family, he does that very beautifully. I think he's also incredibly readable, but then at the same time, each of, dare I say, poem or entry, I don't know what, I mean, we'll probably talk about this later, but with each sort of free verse poem, if you like, stands on its own merit, and then also works really, really well as a novel. I don't have anything to plug. By gut feelings, no, joking. Those would be the ones that I would pick. And also Jason Reynolds, Long Way Down, is absolutely incredible. Oh my gosh. Anything by Jason Reynolds is amazing. But that book in particular, looking at family, and basically it's about this boy who's going to take revenge. Again, it's a long time. I've read it as a graphic novel, and I've read it as, which is also incredibly beautiful as well. But somebody kills his brother, and he knows who it is, and he's going down in the lift, and he kind of gets visited by sort of a ghost, a family member or someone that he knew, or a friend, that's kind of having these discussions as he goes down in the lift and reaches the ground floor. And again, it's just haunting is the only word that I can use to describe it.
Superb, isn't it?
It is that. I mean, I said The Black Flamingo, and I do think it's an exceptionally strong novel, but I also think Long Way Down is incredible.
Oh, I loved those, yeah. I'm glad. I always like it. Oh yes, I've done that one. I've read that
I'm
one.
going to have a very long form to fill out when I request the books, because I could only pick a few.
So, what do you think are the key differences between a verse novel and a more traditional novel, and why do you think they hold particular appeal to YA readers? Because I think a lot of the verse novels are definitely targeted at YA readers.
I'm happy to go first, and I think I'm going to flip that question and start at the end and then work my way back to the beginning. I think the reason they hold so much appeal for young people, they're incredibly readable. You can kind of take your time with the words and digest them. I think having white space on the page, particularly for more reluctant readers, it looks more inviting. I know that sometimes when I was younger, if I looked at a book and it was really small font or really small text and there wasn't enough line spacing, and basically that comes down to the typesetting of the book, it is incredibly daunting, you know, when you're sitting there with a 500-page book. When you pick up a verse novel, and I think as well with verse, you can kind of do some really exciting things. When you look at things like calligrams, how the actual text is shaped on the page, or how you want it to look. Don't know if I've got an example here, but you know, you can literally like take the actual colors of the page. You can use shading. There's so many different things that you can actually do with verse to make it really exciting. But again, I think being able to kind of read something and kind of read it again and really absorb that, you know, I think when you're reading a traditional novel, you know, you read a chapter and you're not going to necessarily say, I'm going to go back and read the chapter, whereas they're smaller entries and it's easier to pick up and like lose yourself, you know, on page 56, and you know the next poem's coming, you put your bookmark in, it's easier to jump back in and really enjoy that journey. And they're also very intensely personal. There's a lot of emotion, there's a lot of thought. In terms of how they're different from traditional novels, I think the main difference is there's a lot less words, and there's a lot less text, and there's a lot more white space on the page. And I think that sometimes we hold a sort of the idea of the economy of words, or how much words weigh. And I don't think that we should be judging a book by necessarily, oh, this book's got 70,000 words and this is better than a book that's got 15,000 words. I think we should be judging it on the words that are actually on the page. Because when you write with verse, you have to be very, very, like, you have to, every word has to mean something. I think when I was writing in prose, you can add things in there, and everyone in this room might read, for example, Fallout, and say, I'd lose this page or I'd lose this line. With verse, it's every word matters on that page, and I imagine that most verse novelists can actually tell you why those words are on that page. So that would probably be the main distinction for me.
Yeah, I'd echo all of that. I think that's absolutely right. As you say, you can start reading, and before you know it, you've read a quarter of the book, and you're completely picked up by it and carried away with it, and you're invested. And that happens, I think, with a verse novel so quickly, and that's what young people perhaps find attractive about this and find enjoyable about it, because it's not a slog to get to that point. And some readers do find a big chunks of prose, as you say, a bit intimidating. So it's wonderful to have stories that can appeal to readers who otherwise might not be using libraries or spending a bit of time reading. So I think that is absolutely key. For me, it's getting lost in it, just allowing that to overtake me, that story to immerse me, and I'm there. I started Gut Feelings last night. I must have read half of it within, an hour or so, and I was just absolutely loving it and completely engrossed. And as you said about the way in which your layout works, I think that's absolutely brilliant. So layout as a feature is gorgeous. I think in Toffee, Sarah Crossan's got a little Christmas tree. That's so cute. I love that. And in Wrecked, I tried to do a clock, whereas I'm not so skilled with computer things. Did you do all of this design?
I did everything. I take.
Wow.
No, I didn't. I didn't. So one of the things I just wanted to echo as well, sorry, and add on, because you had a really interesting point. I think as well, when we think about young people, we think of technology. Every generation, we have a sort of different social platform and different ways of communicating. So you had Facebook, like even when we text, the way that we use language isn't the way that someone that's 15 necessarily uses language. So every platform, then you've got sort of Twitter, we had 140 characters, 280 characters, then we've got, I don't know why I'm doing a wave, by the way, but just go with me on this wave.
Yeah.
Then we've got Instagram, which is more about hashtags, and it's very visual, right? And then we've got like TikTok and Snapchat. And when you think of all of this, like realistically, the attention span for a person that's growing up now is going to be completely different to when I was growing up in sort of the 1990s and the noughties, when we didn't have Facebook, So you need to grab your readers very, very quickly. And this is a fantastic way to do it, because some of the poems in my book are, maybe a couple of hundred words. Some of them are like a tweet. Not like literally a tweet, like I just kind of said, I'm loving this, on Twitter. They're literally like as many characters as you would get in a tweet. And, that's, you kind of, I think it's something that you kind of think about in the back of your mind when you write. With regard to this, Becky Chilcott is the one that actually did this for me. So like, for example, like Stop, and she just really like, it's, to get the emotion across, she really like used shading, used space, used calligrams. It was actually Jake edited my book. So Jake read it before anyone else did. Jake also edited my book, and he's one of the very few people that I trust because he's absolutely phenomenal, and his knowledge of children's books is you can't compare.
Unparalleled.
I was going to say unparalleled, and I was like, is that the right word? And I think it is.
Yeah.
When you say it, it sounds right, so I'm going to say it. But yeah, it's incredible. And Jake made a lot of suggestions with Becky, and I was allowed to see the suggestions, and I made some. So there's a suit of armor, I think, and I knew that I wanted it to look like a suit of armor, and there's certain things I knew what I wanted it to be, but nobody would let me see the book. They let me see 6 pages of it, which I thought was quite mean, but they would not let me read any more. And I mean, there's like just, I think 406 pages. Nobody would actually let me read what this was going to look like. I opened the book, and you are more than welcome to come up and have a look at this copy as well, by the way. And I was just like, wow. Like there's no, like this is going to sound like me trying to sell the book to you, and it's not exactly what it is, but I don't really, I've not seen anything like this for young adults. I've not seen it, and that's like Becky did that. And it was like the best gift I could get, because someone that's typesetting it and gone to all that trouble,
it's fantastic.
It's amazing. It's
the greying in and the greying out bit, and you're thinking, oh my God,
I think she's
amazing.
Like the best in the industry. She also did the title as well, which is quite like simple but effective. Just incredible. I'm just in awe, because I think like I was happy with what I wrote, but then it just adds another layering to it and another dimension.
Definitely. I think also with verse, you've got the kind of musicality of it as well,
Yes.
which perhaps doesn't come through as strongly in a novel. It certainly can, but it may not be something that immediately will strike you. But kids love music, they love songs, they love rhythm, they love rhyme, and when they find that in a novel, I think it's a massively appealing thing. So the kind of organic nature of free verse really lends itself to that musicality, and we can really employ all of the assonance, alliteration, whatever other poetic technique, get it in there, and it's all in service of telling the story in the best way possible.
Yeah, as long you don't have to make a child analyse it, because then
Yes.
that'll turn them off immediately.
Yeah.
Please don't put it on
Yeah.
a set text. That's what they say. So you did mention poetry there, and I was really interested to say, what do you think the differences are between a verse novel and poetry, and if are there any?
What, sorry?
What's the differences between a verse novel
Sorry,
and
it's the last bit
poetry?
I didn't catch.
And if so, what are these?
Okay.
Sorry.
I'm happy to start if you want.
Yeah,
just
if
to.
you want to go. Yeah.
I think it's difficult because I think even just the way you and I write is completely different, and we have our own tones and we have our own techniques, and there is no rule book on how to write a verse novel. I think if you read a poetry collection, it's probably going to be shorter in ways than a verse novel. Generally, obviously, a poetry collection, you're looking at sort of the structure of how you compose all of those poems, and you're very much looking at a sort of central theme or themes. When you're telling a verse novel, I think there's a lot more complexity to it, and you're trying to tell a narrative, like a story in a traditional sense, but in an untraditional form. I always think of like a poem as a moment or an experience, or there's one sort of focal point, whereas when you write in verse, it's a continuation on in a way that is quite different to a poetry collection. There is characters, there's narrative, there's all the things that you would find in a traditional novel, but you've got to kind of capture that in verse. For me, every poem that I wrote in Gut Feelings and everything that I'm working on at the moment, it is very, very difficult to do, but I try to find a way to sort of weave everything together to create that story that people can go, oh wow. But also on those individual pages, I would call them poems, because that's the way that I've written them and that's the way that I've taught them. You can call it entries or text or whatever it is, or pages. For me, the thing with free verse as well is I feel like there's a heartbeat to it as well. And when you're writing, like when I was writing my first verse novel, it's very difficult to say like, oh, I wrote it this way because I just wrote it because it was like the heartbeat that I felt of what I was writing. Like there was a heartbeat to the words and the way that I wanted to tell the story, and it made it easier when it came to the edits because I knew what I wanted and I knew how to kind of convey that. But I think when it comes to poems as well, you've got more rigid form, I think, as well. You've got ballads, sonnets, haikus.
She's the English teacher.
It's like I feel like my accent sometimes trips me up, and also you've got all those techniques, like you can have calligrams where it's the shape of the poem, assonance, consonance, sibilance, alliteration, rhyme. I think that you've got to be more careful in some ways about the techniques that you use, because the techniques that you can use can actually undercut what you are trying to say. So if you're telling a story, for example, about chronic illness or grief, or you're trying to build tension, and you've got like your sort of 5 entries or poems, and you're trying to build to that moment, you're trying to build to a kind of climactic scene, you've got to be really careful about the techniques that you're using, because those techniques can actually undercut the tension, if that makes sense. I got very dramatic with my hands there, I apologise.
You had us all there.
It's interesting.
I was building momentum.
Yeah. I think poetry has always told stories. I mean, we go back before the novel. The novel came about, at the end of the 18th century, late 1700s is when the novel begins. I've just been reading Aurora Leigh by Elizabeth Barrett Browning, one of the big Victorian verse novels. There's so much kind of narrative verse in all the centuries. Shakespeare did it, Chaucer did it, Beowulf, it's all there. And then the novel turns up and poses this kind of problem for poetry in a sense, because people got very, very excited about reading in a different form. And at the start of Aurora Leigh, there's a section from Elizabeth Barrett Browning, and she's saying, I think I'm going to write a book like a novel, but in poetry. And I just think that that's exactly it. It's what we're doing, isn't it? We're telling the story. We're conveying plot, characters, but we're using poetic techniques. Now, she's all in iambic pentameter, and we're not doing that. We're playing fast and loose with our verse. So, as I said earlier, it's much more organic. But we're taking, I think, the best from poetry and the best from novel, and we're matching them up, and we're making this beautiful, these beautiful works of art that capture you and take you along with the characters in the plot, but at the same time give you the wonderful kind of emotional engagement of poetry. So hopefully you hook them in with the story, and then they fall in love with the words and the way in which that story is being told. So I think we've got the best of both worlds, really.
Yeah.
It's kind of like verse is freeing in some ways to
Yeah,
write
yeah,
in.
yeah.
But then, like I said, because it's so freeing, you've got to be careful and kind of be quite concise in what you're trying to say. Or that's the way, again, I can't really speak for all verse novelists, but, you know, yeah.
Yeah,
I'm good. Just
absolutely.
gonna leave it
Yeah,
there.
yeah, I think so. I mean, it's amazing how you can use, for example, white space, as you've already said. It can work as punctuation. It can work as just kind of giving the emotion is allowed to come through in that white space that you wouldn't necessarily. You wouldn't be able to incorporate that if you were writing traditionally. So it can act in all sorts of different ways. It's just so freeing.
And we're only
Definitely.
really getting to the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
What we can actually do with verse novels, I think there's a lot more
Oh,
that
definitely.
we can do.
Yeah.
Just open that small
Yeah.
crack in that door.
Yeah. But it's so exciting that so many more UK YA writers are now using this form. Because I think it's been pretty long established in the US and Australia, hasn't it? But for YA here, for UK, I mean, Sarah Crosson's probably the earliest UK
Yeah,
writer
that
that I can think of, and all the others that I think of are American writers and Australian writers.
Yeah.
So it's brilliant that we've got these lots and lots of up and coming UK YA verse novelists. Really great.
Absolutely. Now, I'm our school librarian.
Yeah.
But my other role in school is I coordinate careers at my school because they decided I wasn't busy enough, quite frankly. So they decided to give me a bit of it. But I always knew when I was 7 I wanted to be a librarian. But I do enjoy my careers role. But did you know when you were at school that you wanted to be a writer?
So I was in second class, which I think I was about maybe 7 or 8, I think. And I loved writing sort of fantastical and looking at myths and fantasy and Frankenstein and all these different things. I wasn't reading Frankenstein when I was 8. However, the idea of Frankenstein's monster was always around me, and I was fascinated by it. I think as well, like, given I came from a disadvantaged area in Dublin, so for me, I'm quite passionate when I go into schools and talk about writing and how you can get into it and some of the realities of it as well. It didn't seem like something I could do. It didn't seem like something, because nobody in my family had been to university. You know, I didn't know anyone that wrote. I didn't see any of that. So it was, I didn't know that I could do it, but I knew that I liked doing it, and that was what was most important to me. So from about 8, I knew, and then sort of 16, 17, 18, 19, I was writing a really bad novel. That was terrible, that will never see the light of day. That's actually fantasy about witches, believe it or not, considering I write things that are completely different now. But yeah.
Same sort of thing, really. I always wanted to be a writer, but not in a real way, because I read books by Judy Blume. She lived in America, so how could I possibly know anything about her as a real life person and kind of connect myself to Judy Blume or whoever else it was? It was either American YA writers or Paula Danziger, Judy Blume, or it was dead white men, probably. And I had a house full of books, and I devoured them all and wrote terrible teenage nonsense. But I never actually thought, this will get published, because I didn't know how to get published. But now I think young people are, hopefully, if they want that career, they are so much more clued in. They can have access to the information, how to go about it, and all the varied careers in publishing. I became an English teacher because I absolutely love books. But then I found out that I also really enjoy spending time with teenagers as well, because they're completely just they're originals, aren't they? They're not jaded and fed up. There's optimism and there's energy, and it gives me lots of inspiration for my writing. But fundamentally, I'm somebody who absolutely loves words and language and stories. So it was always something I wanted, but I didn't have a clue about going about it.
No, I think just listening to it, that's what I try to say to the students is just whatever you enjoy. I don't care. Just be happy. I just want you to be happy.
Yes.
That's
Yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah.
As long as you're happy, that's fine. That's all I'm happy
yeah.
about. So I know that, Louise, you said you're a teacher.
Yes.
And Chris, I know that you're involved in other work. So how do you fit that into your writing? And do you just stay all morning, or do you have certain times that when you're doing your writing, or is it all just whenever?
A mess.
A chaotic mess.
Chaotic mess for me. I don't know about you.
I would echo chaotic mess. So I during the summer I got a little puppy, so she dictates my life right now. So she goes on a walk, we go on a walk. Otherwise, I get scratches all over my face in the morning, which is absolutely lovely. So yeah, I tend to write at the weekends, and I kind of go into cafes. I have to distance myself because I do work from home. I can't have that association. I did write my third novel and kind of finished it, and it's just something, I don't know what it is. But again, it's kind of like writing whenever I can. If I finished work, and I have the energy and that sort of, energy to do it, I will write. But generally, I'll just try and write as much as I can at the weekends and just get it finished.
Yeah, I mean, I have marking, I have lesson preparation. I have 2 days off a week, but school just kind of seeps in. And so for me, it's much more when a summer holiday time and grabbing snatches of time here and there. When I'm in a book and when I'm in, and Scooby actually, Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, that's a great group for keeping you on track because we meet up and we share work. But unless I'm in a project and I've got the story, then I don't any longer have this disciplined 1,000 words a day every night. That's how I began, but I can't sustain that anymore. A lot of my time now on my days off is school visits or promotional stuff. Write an article for this, do this for this. So it's really hard to juggle it. Really hard.
So he's doing the other bits as well.
Yes.
All the extra bits that you don't think about when you sat there
starting
writing.
out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, promotional stuff.
And so that goes to my last question, which is, what advice would you give to your younger self?
My younger self, I would say, take every opportunity that comes your way. Just don't let anything pass you by. Have every experience. Don't be timid. Don't be afraid to throw yourself in there and see what happens. And yeah, go for it. Really, I think I've always been a little bit timorous, and generally speaking, about pushing myself forward for things. But I think ultimately you get the most out of life the more you experience life, don't you? So although I do not regret many hours spent reading books at home in my bedroom, equally I feel like experiencing the world in all its variety is a hugely important thing for young people to do. So just going for it. That will be my tip.
In some ways, I don't want to give my younger self any advice, because if I did, I wouldn't be where I am now. And I know that's a weird sort of waxing philosophical about it. The only advice that I think I would give is there's going to be dark and there's going to be light, and you can't have the light without the dark, and the dark isn't forever. The moments that are the darkest will just make the light lighter or brighter, if that makes sense. I think we all have dark moments and we all have light moments, and I think you look back at your experience in retrospect. Like, I look back at when 13, when I was when I had my first surgery, and I was like, oh, that was fine. And in the moment, it wasn't. It was like 2 weeks in hospital. It was a long time, and not being able to eat for 6 days and just looking at the walls. But I got so much more out of it, and I'm alive, and I've got routine, I've got my health, I've got a dog.
Oh, but that's lovely. And that you don't have, because it's a bit of I don't think I'd I think I wouldn't want to give myself any other advice either. It's just kind of, because what you've experienced probably does just shape what you become as an adult, doesn't it?
You just don't know, if you, again, I don't want to get philosophical, but if I told myself that, would I have done that? Would I have been here? Would the dominoes have fallen the way that they did? But yeah.
That's lovely. And I'm now going to open questions to the floor if we have any. Oh, straight in there, straight in there.
I'm very interested about ebooks and this genre, because I was just thinking, obviously, when you're reading on a page, you get the effect of the shapes and the pace, etc. But how do you think people, or what needs to happen for ebooks, or what effect do you think it has on ebooks?
In terms of writing in free verse, is it like in terms of that?
Yeah, in terms of the free verse, because you were saying, about the space on the page and things like that. It's a bit different, isn't it? When I read a lot of ebooks, but the experience is different when you're reading a physical book versus an ebook.
Do you want to go first, or?
Yeah, I think if you've got really brilliant typesetters who fix it so it works for the ebook, I think that there's some of it can be replicated, can't it? But I think you're right. There is a difference, and I'm not quite sure how we bridge that really. I think then it becomes much more about the story than about some of those other effects, and the story would be the thing that needs to carry it. Oh, I don't know how's this worked out on ebook. Have you looked? But no.
Shouldn't laugh,
So
sorry.
I think it does impact it. Issues of layout can be tricky.
So yeah, it is tricky. It's a different book on the ebook. It couldn't. I mean, this file is massive. The amount of detail in this book, and even there's a poem called Google, and there's Google search bars. How to feel this, how to feel that. Even just a single page, the way that it's done, the paper that it's on, all the way throughout. There's a lot of different, dare I say, illustrations or designs. And when they actually tried to put that onto the ebook and onto Kindle, the file's too big. It's a 400 page book for a start. It's about 31,000 words in total, if I remember correctly from when I wrote it, like 3 years ago. And yeah, it's just all that work and detailing, it doesn't translate, and everything moves, and it's just not supported. So they've used the manuscript that I submitted and kept it in that verse form, so you can still read it. It's up to you what way you want to read it. I do feel like that when you read it, you're not necessarily getting the same experience because of the calligrams and the way that things are shaped and the work that Becky's done. My answer, but yeah, it is difficult, and I think going forward that's something to think about. If we're going to design it this way, how is it going to be supported in that format? I don't necessarily know that there is a way around that, especially if you're going to do a lot of detailing, and like you said, the typesetter, if you've got a really good typesetter, they'll be able to kind of do bits and pieces, but then you're almost working on two separate files, right? Because you're working on a file for the ebook, and you're also working on a file for sort of the physical book. And the difficulty with that is that it'll probably increase the cost for the typesetter, and that is incurred by the publisher. It's whether the publisher wants to do that or not.
We have a question online from Hannah from Edinburgh. Said that both of you have very strong protagonists in your books. And could you say a little bit more about how you approach characterisation?
Good question. Yeah, the character in my next YA book, which I think is coming out in the autumn, so that's called Activist, and she's an interesting character because she's really nothing like me, and all of your characters end up having bits and bits of you in them, I think. So in order to get her, I've done a lot of reading around activism and feminism, and tried to really understand where she's coming from, and seeing how young people are approaching the big issues of the day. But this character's got massive guts. She's no coward. and I'm such a scaredy cat, but she is just out there saying what she thinks all the time, confronting authority. Again, it wouldn't be something that I would feel comfortable doing, but she does it. Maybe in a sense, I find my own kind of, well, you talk about getting angry. When I get angry about stuff, I put my anger in, instead of going out and shouting at someone in real life, which I can't do, there she is doing it for me. So I guess a lot of my characterization comes from feelings and approaches that I might have, and then I'll do a lot of research about the issues that my characters care about and their drives and their motivations, and that's how I develop them, really, I think. Yeah. How about you?
I would echo that. So I would say for gut feelings, it is my story. So it didn't really create. There wasn't a lot of character work there. It was, the house was built. I didn't have to reinvent it. For Fallout, it was very much, I guess, an aspect of me and a more naive me when I was younger. Although I'm going to say this now in case anyone reads it or anyone's watching online, that the experiences is all fictionalized. The character aspects of it are me. Because my mum read the book and was like, "Did this happen?" I was like, "God, no. We're not having that conversation again. No." But there was aspects of it, like I'm quite sassy and I could be quite feisty sometimes, not like in a mean way, but I kind of love having a joke and being kind of having quips and stuff with my friends, and that was like the character of M. I've been lucky with the characterization. It's not anything I've ever had to work for. It's just been there. The characters live in my head. The next one that I'm writing at the moment, and I don't want to say too much about it, is actually based on something that I experienced. Again, it's not going to be a light read. I don't think anything I'm probably ever going to write is going to be a light read, unfortunately. No, not unfortunately, but it is something that I've experienced, and it's again, it's something that's been quite difficult, and I've had to the characters in my head. It's really hard to describe the characters in my head. The story, and I've got to work out the complexities of the story, but the characters kind of live in my head, and to the point where sometimes I can't sleep at night. It's like 3 a.m. and the characters, like, it sounds like I'm hearing voices in my head, and it's almost a little bit like that. Like I'm hearing the story from them, and I don't know how to. That's why I'm trying to get all these stories out, because I just want the characters to stop. But that's how I see it. Like I hear the characters, which sounds crazy, and a lot of authors say this. I genuinely hear the characters, particularly when I go to bed and I'm trying to sleep. I seem to write at
That's
night.
when you get all your best ideas, isn't
Yeah,
it?
it's
All
when
your best lines
It's when
come
you've
to
had
you.
your cup of coffee
Yeah,
at 7
yeah.
o'clock before the event, and you're up all night.
Dictaphone, you can just type.
Yeah.
I do send myself voice messages, and I go, "Oh God, this is going to be beautiful verse," and I go, and I listen to it the next morning. And I go, "What was I on last night?" It's like, shouldn't have had that gin and tonic before bed. No, seriously, I do have some like really great ideas as I go to bed, and I record them, and then other ones I listen to, I kind of go, "What did I mean?" It's so cryptic. It's almost like trying to write the verse poem and then kind of going, "What's it about?" It's so cryptic.
Yeah.
It's almost Shakespearean. No, I was joking. Anyone else have a question?
I don't think we've got any more questions.
No.
Anything you'd like to say as a final thought?
I think, for anyone that's a librarian or anyone that's encouraging people to read, just lead them to the books and let them, and I think everyone does this anyway. I think it's just beautiful just to let people read what they want to read, particularly kids, if it's a magazine, if it's, and put the books in front of them. I just think sometimes we're trying to break down that stigma of like, oh, you should read this book, or this is a must read, and that's what I love about verse novels, because I think a lot of young people find them and they just kind of get swept up in them. That's the only thing I would say, I think.
Yeah, I'd say, it's just so brilliant to have the chance to talk to people like you who have come because you love books, you love young people, and you want to find the right book for the right person at the right time. And that is what we're all doing, isn't it? That is the thing that drives us all. And because we know how reading transforms lives, it's definitely transformed mine. And thank you so much for all of that. It's just absolutely phenomenal work that librarians, feeling on people do. So thank you very much.
Yeah, no, I just want to echo that as well. Thank you so much, because a lot of, particularly I've noticed that a lot of the sort of my book has gotten to the hands of people through librarians, and I actually hear that back. And when I hear the feedback, particularly about gut feelings, it's just really heartening to know that people are connecting with it, and librarians are leading people to my story. So thank you so much.
I think also on the behalf of the librarians, thank you for writing something that we can say, you need to read this because it's going to make you a person that's more empathetic, and it's just about getting them to experience things from another person's point of view, which is just like absolute the classic.
Absolutely.
And thank you, Amanda, as well, for chairing and for
Thank
inviting
you
us
for your
here. Yeah.
questions.
Thank you very
so much.
And I'll just join you for a second to
Yes.
say, Amanda, you mentioned that we've got a verse novel collection that we are about to start to collaborate with you.
Absolutely.
And a thank you to a big shout out for librarians, because we will do that work with you. If any of you have any suggestions, we've got a book request form on our website, and you know we want to start a conversation about verse novels, and potentially to have more than one copy if you want to have a kind of reading group, if we feel that there are books that we think are going to be really popular too. So that conversation will go on as long as it needs to, Kay, won't it? Kay at the Children's Book Festival will be doing lots of events within the library and outside where we'll ask that question about verse novels. And we had a few responses online. Matt Goodfellow suggested several books. So other writers are really interested in that verse novel combination. So thank you very much, Chris and Louisa and Amanda. Thanks to Jake and Anne Fine, and to everyone who's joined us this evening. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. God.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are we out?